FAR.F4.M5.
Welcome back. Today we're tackling bonds. Part 2, which is one of those topics that looks terrifying because of all the schedules. Jenna, I think that's what scares people the most. They see columns of numbers and immediately think, well, I'm done.
I think that's exactly right, Russell. The funny part is the numbers are actually the easy part once you understand the story they're telling. This module isn't really about arithmetic. It's about understanding how a bond gradually moves from whatever it's sold for back to its face value.
So, here's the picture I want everyone to carry around for the entire episode. Imagine a GPS that's always trying to get you to one destination. That destination is face value. No matter what happened on day 1, premium or discount, the carrying value is always traveling toward face value.
That's the perfect starting point. If a bond was issued at a discount, carrying value starts below face and climbs upward every interest period. If a bond was issued at a premium, carrying value starts above face and gradually declines. Nothing random is happening. Everything you calculate is simply another step toward face value on maturity day.
And that's your first exam shortcut. Instead of memorizing dozens of journal entries, just ask yourself one question. Which direction does carrying value need to move? If you're holding a discount, it has to move up. If you're holding a premium, it has to move down. That single thought predicts half the entries before you ever touch a calculator.
Exactly. Now this module introduces two ways of getting there: the straight line method and the effective interest method. The CPA exam expects you to understand both, but the textbook makes an important distinction. The effective interest method is the required US GAAP method. Straight line may be used only when the difference between the two methods is immaterial.
I like thinking about straight line as driving at a constant speed. Every period, you travel exactly the same distance. No surprises.
That's a useful analogy. But here's where it breaks down. The bond itself isn't actually earning or costing money at a constant dollar amount. Interest is based on the carrying value at the beginning of each period. Since carrying value changes, interest expense changes too. That's why effective interest isn't constant. It's responsive.
Good correction. So, straight line says, let's just divide everything evenly. Effective interest says, let's let economics determine what happens.
Exactly. That's why effective interest is considered conceptually correct. The interest expense reflects the market rate that investors demanded when the bond was issued.
Now, let's talk about the formula that students either love or hate. Actually, it's only one idea wearing different clothes. Cash interest, interest expense, amortization. Those three are always connected.
The passkey in your textbook is trying to get you to see exactly that relationship. For effective interest, start with the beginning carrying value. Multiply it by the effective or market interest rate. That gives you interest expense. Cash interest is completely separate. Cash interest always comes from the face value, multiplied by the stated coupon rate. The difference between those two amounts becomes amortization.
That's probably the biggest trap. Students mix up the two interest rates. They remember there are two percentages, but forget which one gets applied where.
So here's the mental checklist. Face value uses the coupon rate. Beginning carrying value uses the market rate. Never swap them. If you accidentally reverse them, the entire schedule falls apart.
Here's an analogy. Think of the face value as the size of the original loan agreement. Cash interest is based on what the contract promised. But interest expense is based on what the debt is actually worth on the books today. Those aren't always identical.
Exactly. And once premium or discount exists, those two values stop matching. That's why amortization exists in the first place. It's constantly shrinking the gap between carrying value and face value.
Let's separate discounts from premiums because people constantly blend them together. Discount first. If I buy something for less than face value, I'm eventually paying back full face value. So somehow that discount has to disappear.
Right. With a discount, carrying value increases every period. Interest expense exceeds cash interest. That extra interest expense is exactly what causes the carrying value to rise.
So, discount equals bigger interest expense than cash paid. Carrying value rises.
Correct. Now flip everything for a premium. The bond started above face value, so carrying value must gradually decrease. Cash interest now exceeds interest expense. That difference reduces the premium until the carrying value equals face value at maturity.
Whenever I forget which way things go, I ask one question. Does carrying value need to climb or fall? Everything else usually follows from that.
That's a great exam habit. Instead of memorizing 4 independent rules, derive them from the carrying value movement. The journal entries become much easier because they have a purpose instead of being isolated facts.
Now, let's address something students often misunderstand. Why doesn't carrying value simply stay wherever it started? Wouldn't life be easier?
It definitely would. But remember what happened on issuance day. The market decided the bond wasn't worth exactly face value because market rates differed from the stated coupon. The premium or discount simply adjusted the selling price to reflect market conditions. As time passes, however, maturity gets closer. Eventually, everyone knows exactly what will be repaid. Face value. So the carrying value naturally converges toward that amount.
That makes the premium and discount feel temporary instead of permanent. They're basically corrections that slowly disappear.
That's a nice way to think about them. They're timing adjustments rather than permanent features of the debt.
The module also brings bond issuance costs back into the conversation. I know people sometimes think those are an entirely separate topic.
They're really connected. Bond issuance costs reduce the carrying amount of the liability and are amortized using the effective interest method. Conceptually, they become part of the overall effective yield calculation for the issuer. The investor's accounting is not affected by the issuer's bond issuance costs.
That's worth repeating. Issuer cares. Investor doesn't.
Exactly. That's a favorite distinction because students sometimes assume both parties record the same thing. They don't.
Now we reach one of the sections that initially seems weird. Bonds issued between interest dates. At first glance, it feels like somebody accidentally overpaid.
It definitely feels strange until you realize what's happening. Interest has already been accumulating before the bond is sold. The purchaser reimburses the issuer for that accrued interest. Then, on the next interest payment date, the purchaser receives the entire scheduled interest payment. Economically, everything balances out.
I like imagining two friends splitting a dinner bill. One person already paid for the appetizer before the other arrived. When the second friend shows up, they reimburse half the appetizer cost. Later, when the entree comes, they both share it normally. Nobody overpaid. They simply settled up.
That's actually a helpful analogy. The purchaser isn't paying extra interest. They're reimbursing interest that accrued before they owned the bond. The later interest payment includes that period, so everything evens out.
Another topic students often rush through is year-end interest accruals. They think nobody paid anything, so nothing happened.
But accounting follows accrual principles. If interest has been incurred by year-end, it must be recognized even if the payment occurs later. The adjusting entry captures the expense that belongs in the current reporting period. If premium or discount exists, the related amortization continues as well.
So the calendar matters more than the cash.
Exactly. Financial statements are trying to report what happened during the reporting period, not simply what was paid.
Let's circle back to something that shows up throughout the examples. Schedules. Students sometimes believe they have to memorize every column.
Don't memorize the table. Understand why each column exists. Beginning carrying value tells you where you started. Interest expense reflects the market rate. Cash interest reflects the contractual payment. Amortization explains the difference. Ending carrying value becomes next period's beginning carrying value. It's one continuous chain.
It's almost like hiking. Every campsite becomes tomorrow morning's starting point. You don't reset back to the parking lot every day.
Exactly. Every ending carrying value becomes the beginning carrying value for the next interest period. That's why mistakes early in a schedule tend to carry forward.
Let's do a rapid-fire review. Discount.
Below face at issuance. Carrying value increases. Interest expense exceeds cash interest.
Premium.
Above face at issuance. Carrying value decreases. Cash interest exceeds interest expense.
Effective interest.
Beginning carrying value multiplied by the effective market rate determines interest expense. Cash interest comes from face value multiplied by the coupon rate. Their difference is amortization.
Straight line.
Equal amortization each period. Permitted only when the difference from the effective interest method is immaterial.
Between interest dates.
Purchaser reimburses accrued interest at purchase, then receives the full scheduled interest payment later.
Year-end accrual.
Recognize interest incurred through the reporting date, even though payment comes later.
I think the biggest mindset shift in this module is realizing bonds aren't about memorizing journal entries. They're about following one financial story from issuance until maturity.
That's exactly the mental model I hope everyone remembers. Every interest period answers the same questions. Where did carrying value begin? How much interest expense does today's carrying value generate at the market rate? How much cash does the contract require? How much amortization closes the gap? Where does carrying value end? Answer those questions over and over, and nearly every bond problem becomes recognizable.
And if panic sets in during the exam, don't start with formulas. Start with direction. Ask whether you're dealing with a premium or a discount. Ask where carrying value is trying to go. Once you know the destination, the calculations suddenly make a lot more sense.
Exactly. The schedules aren't random spreadsheets. They're simply a map showing carrying value making one steady journey toward face value. Once that picture sticks, the journal entries, the amortization, the accruals, and the exam questions all become much easier to organize in your mind.
That's Bonds. Part 2. Next time you see one of those intimidating amortization schedules, don't think about memorizing rows of numbers. Think about the story. The carrying value has a destination. Everything else is just documenting the trip.